Hello, my name is Yaraslau. I will speak a little bit about Belarus and then do some overview of Ukraine, a very complex subject. I made big presentation, so there would be a lot of information. I didn't know what a lot of speakers covered a lot of awesome subjects better than me, so I'll just skip some of the slides. In the future, hopefully it will be accessible. So I'm Yaraslau. Not many of you know me, probably. I'm a game researcher since 90s and a game developer since 1996. And I have over 100 publications in different areas, ethics, games, and psychology. And working at the moment, my affiliation is with UKW University, and also part-time I'm working with Stalin University. So I'm a person of the world. Unfortunately, I'm Ukrainian with Belarusian citizen, and now I'm a refugee in Belarus. So I will tell you about what's going on in Belarus in the industry, give some numbers, because Alyosha covered here a lot of cool things. I'll just give a little numbers, and then we'll talk about Ukraine and what's going on in Ukraine, because it's very understudied. I myself also the head of Belarusian Game Developers Association, and I'm co-organizer of the biggest in CIS region Ukrainian B2B conference, game industry conference. This is why I'm lucky to have access to some statistics of the industry, because we're trying to research it somehow. So hopefully some of this information you will find interesting. So Belarusian game development industry changed in 2020. A lot of data which you will receive has changed. A lot of companies which you will see have been integrated in other game industries which are of your countries. And so right now the biggest question is for game industry, when in the future or since 2020, when we consider doing any research, if they identify themselves as Belarusian companies. And that is the main keystone, because we have even Association of Belarusian Businesses Abroad, which I'm advisor of on behalf of Game Developers Association, and that we will see. So in 2020, we got the revolution, maybe you heard about it, and a lot of people went through jail, including me and some other people. We had, I have been representative of International Game Developers Association, a regional coordinator for Eastern Europe and Asia. So, and we signed open letter. It means that a lot of people went to jail of the industry, and some got shrapnel wounds and stuff. So right now it's a big mess of the industry. So for the future, we got a lot of relocation. But Belarusian Game Developers Association got some insight, and we are still functioning. We're still representing Belarus in different international events, and we're submitting our statistics in European Game Developers Federation reports. So right now, the latest is published 2020. You can find it for your research. There's some data about games, about developers, about quantities, and about companies of countries, yours perhaps included. When built before 2020, Belarus had 151 studio plus outsourcers. I'm not taking into account outsourcers right now, unfortunately, because their IP for their games belongs to other countries. Even though they're talented and creative, we have a lot of talented people who had their hand in a lot of world-known games, but they don't have the right to call them their own, and it's not affiliated with Belarus. And 151 is not as much as some countries perhaps who were here like 40 or something, even though they're like 10 times smaller than Belarus, because a lot of these companies are huge, like not even talking about wargaming, which few thousand people big, but for example, Attack Art, Playtika, and so on, they have few thousand developers, which is the size of game developing industry of some countries. So we had one of the biggest game developer industries in the world, though it wasn't that diverse and was focused on mobile in later years. So in 2020, last research showed that we had 50 studios less. It means the big one relocated, and small ones probably they're like only formally there. right now we from over 10,000 game developers, we have not right now only 3,000 remained. So research. Um, we have been researching game developers in the industry since 2018, and we also monitored how many games are released by Belarusian developers per year, and because we need to nominate it for Central and East European Games Awards and so on. Per average, you can count the smallest amount of games released per year, 52, the biggest amount, 87 so far. Very few are PC or console games, unfortunately, but a lot of them hyper casual. That's why this multitude is, unheard of. Nobody. Okay, this is mobile is a big share of the market on last year. Just so small numbers, study of past in digital games. I will have only small statistics because Alyosha covered most of cool stuff. So as he mentioned, we have most researched game, and some people counted over 2,000 publications about that, and mostly indeed foreign, and a lot of Russians because they like World War II and they just can't get off the subject, appropriating as many of you noticed. Also, interesting statistics. I hope you find it useful. Found some of the most researched Belarusian games, and interesting that most of them, of course, on World War II, because a lot of researchers are Russians and they just can't get off the subject. And I also mentioned which percentage of researcher is actually Belarusian, which I could find, so it looks pretty interesting. But it's actually, I made percentage because the difference is huge between war gaming, which has like a few thousand publications, and for example, Legends of Eisenwald, which has just a little over 10. So it looks like that more equal, perhaps. And this is a Police is also a very interesting series of games, which when researched, sometimes they quote only one, the first one, but not many people know, but it's about America, and quite interesting that it was actually nominated for the best game of the year on Central East European Games Awards. So, okay, that's as everything else was mentioned. This research of game history in Belarus, yes, and as Alyosha mentioned, that most of people who keep it are different forums, online forums. Many of them already outdated and unfortunately die out and disappear. Some computer clubs which are no more. Also, because the country is post-Soviet and still is Soviet to some extent, a higher generation considers it a child's play, so they don't really allow it anywhere. Though we have association, we started gathering stuff, and we even had our own museum of merch as well, which we used to teach game dev industry how to promote their games and how to get inspired and stuff, and cooperating with universities which taught game development. And libraries, unfortunately, they just could care less about games. Sometimes some of them actually have tabletop games. No, they just started recently keeping it, but video games they don't consider like something they should actually have. And universities, because we have 3.5 game dev educations. Most of them are foreign state universities, and even though wargaming actually helped to found in one university a course on game development, they canceled their partnership. Wargaming just built out of the partnership the next year, but they're still going on about it, and they just took the teachers and asked them to teach new thing. The same teachers who taught like informatics like for 30 years now have to teach, and the only name the dean of that education knows is like Diablo, and he always speaks about. So basically, it's very underdeveloped, and we don't have that heritage yet. That wargaming has its own museum, and but it has it not in. Wargaming Museum actually has some heritage, but they don't focus on Belarusian game dev. They just do their own thing. So publications on Belarusian game development is in Russian is over 13,000, almost 14, and in English 15,000. We still have to research that some of them perhaps overlap because because new Russian requirements in the last few years that they have to copy, do some copy of some of at least theses on English. So we need to research this. Why we showed two numbers, and so far from it, from it, we noticed that a lot of them study like Belarusian games. Okay, we found that over 200 Belarusian researchers who do it, but mainly students during their diploma thesis. Sometimes some publishers by master degree in Belarus, but it's not as the same as master degree in Europe. It's more like overrated diploma project, and those publications are not promoted, not considered too serious, unfortunately. Only 3% of people, Belarusians, who actually do something about games, they actually have some kind of academic degree and do it post-grad, not as a part of something like some formal education. Also interesting that most of research actually focuses on psychological effect of games on the person, or educational or ideological, which is quite interesting because there were a lot of books motivated by Russian Orthodox Church, and some of the books in 90s, which actually I had in my collection, were focusing on how games destroy like traditional values and stuff like that. So it's an old game they're leading. Because so development of historical games in Belarus, there's a short review of what games have historical heritage, and some of them, because if we nominate some games on behalf of Belarus, we have to connect with them and ask if they allow us to nominate this game on behalf of Belarus, because they also can be irritated, or sometimes maybe they're working with some company which doesn't want them, or maybe like they have just similar name, like divisions of, for example, Playtika, or Playrix, or like Ubisoft, for example. Some games and wargaming as well. Some games were developed not even in Belarus, but still they considered to be Belarusian. They asked us to nominate them. But we know that, for example, World of Planes mainly was Ukrainian, and World of Warships mainly was developed in St. Petersburg. So there's some bigger lists. So there are quite a few games, and actually nice to say that we have quite a lot of games. Unfortunately, there was no national pride for it, and not many people actually researched it. And none of them, like Alyosha, was like the first to focus on Belarusian games to big extent, to promote them abroad. So hopefully it will go on, and Ukrainian frogware games, all I found like 15 Sherlock Holmes games. you will also cover. So also games and education in Belarus. Unfortunately, system of education, of higher education, they don't consider games as something serious, and mainly higher education is state and state regulated. We have really firm legal regulation of education, and they cannot introduce anything new. Basically, so even if it's private university, officials from ministry wouldn't understand. So in official education, they can only create clubs, and that's the only thing they can, or hang out together on our meetups and stuff. National Institute of Education, I have been also a researcher there and help them for a couple of years. It's actually Institute of Ministry of Education, which focused on school education, and we tried to instill games in educational process. Actually, it was crazy because they were doing everything through Moodle. It was in 2000, I think, 2012 2012, Michal, we've met in 2012, right? That conference. At that time, I also was running conferences on game study for like almost 10 years in Belarus, and officials couldn't accept it as something because a lot of publications were foreign and they couldn't comprehend its necessity, but we managed to squeeze through at least some live action role playing and some board games. Sports education is used. Now, by the way, there are actually Belarusian developed video games which are used to train sportsmen, like for handball and so on. There are actually articles in journalistic articles about it, which is really good and interesting. Okay, underground political games. The thing is that unlike in Ukraine, which we will speak of later, political games in Belarus you can't just create a game about what's going on, because you will be just killed or imprisoned or whatever. This is why the people are still trying to develop it. They have security protocols and it takes longer time. Not like in Ukraine, you made the game, everyone applauded to you. Some games are under development, but until their creators are out of Belarus, it's difficult to publish them and announce. But there are some narrative games. There have been some games to create positive, at least one or two games to create positive image of Lukashenko, which actually was developed, sponsored by Dagestan. Which is interesting because their first game was about Kadyrov and how nice he is. So it's on Steam, Love in Belarus, something like that. But the principle is unforgiving, unforgetting. Some games will be definitely developed to keep to remember what's going on. It's a slogan of Belarusian revolution, not to forgive those who are to blame, so they wouldn't repeat it, and not to forget what's going on, not to repeat the same mistakes. So now still have like about 12 minutes, so we'll go really quickly about Ukraine, because right now this topic is bigger and they're less researched. But actually, Ukrainian game development industry is much bigger than Belarusian and more diverse. Even though in Belarus, for example, in Belarus, some were developing actually games to. A lot of our outsourcers, I didn't mention, Belarus has a lot of outsourcers. One of our biggest IT outsourcing companies, like EPAM Systems, which is over 40,000 developers. And they do a lot of also game development in a lot of those companies. And one of the big size of their clientele, actually, they have separate divisions there to do games for education. And I know personally a lot of game developers who actually participate in that. And some of the projects of Belarus, such as Virtual Classroom, for example, from Iridescent Studio, through their division in United States, they conquered, as they say, I hope it's right. They conquered like schools, American schools, because they teach a lot of subject in games and they create virtual reality games. And right now, probably it surged due to COVID because they were already successful before COVID. Okay, so Ukraine also has a lot of awesome diversities. Unfortunately, we don't have time to talk about them, but if you're interested, please approach. Also, I excluded all other games, even though there are some research results on tabletop games, on live action role-playing games, educational games, serious games, medical games, rehabilitative, and so on, so on, so on. Introduction to Ukrainian game developers industry. There was no research done, as Ukraine doesn't have its own game developers association and community. The only way we can research it is for the industry, for HR, and so on. So, a couple of statistics though I got. The oldest research, the closest research to us from Ukraine is from 2018, and of Ukrainian HR is just recent. So here it is. Countries where residents stayed before the war, a lot of them as well have moved around. Ukrainians are travel right now, though many of them returned, but they are trying to actually keep their companies working because they need to bring money in the country. And hopefully, as you know, here in Prague, Stalker developers are sitting right now, a couple hundred of them. You've seen them at Game Dev Session just the other month. And a lot of them, as you see, as 77% of respondents will return to Ukraine, and that's a great deal. Of course, most of those who relocated, also a gender number is that a lot of them actually female, because to a male, it's illegal to leave the country during the mobilization being announced unless they have certain conditions which are difficult to meet. Okay, like 3 children and old age or too young. Yeah. So we will have a lot of changes to Ukrainian game development because they are now more recognized, and they will get more money, and probably the result of the war will destroy a lot of inside corruption, which will help them to function more efficiently. This is research of 2018, which shows in which cities actually they have how many companies. At that time, there were quite a few. Actually, Ukrainian game developer and like community counted to up 20,000 game developers. Many of them, of course, were working for some other companies, sometimes remotely for Russian and so on. Like I myself worked for Russian company of Vladivostok long time ago. So and some other companies. But there are a lot of people, and there were like a couple of conferences. There is a list. Interesting. At 2018, you should remember 2018, they're showing which company, how many years have been in Ukraine. Since then, they got even more companies, and many of global brands opened divisions there, like Ubisoft, for example, and many others. Crytek moved in even more, and some new and of course, Belarusians after 2020 moved a lot of game developers companies into Ukrainian, and it actually harmed the market, the industry, because Belarusian focus was more on casual, hyper casual, and there's no creativity in that. It's even boring to research it, because they're all like clones. So actually, a lot of Ukrainian indies were killed by it because they had harder time finding investments for their more creative, interesting narrative, maybe hardcore games, and they were forced to do casual, hyper casual because investor was there and publishers. If you look at top 10 hyper casual games, at some years, it was like a year ago, 4 of them were actually published by Belarusian publisher, like in Belarusian. So top 10 grossing. So you can see by mainly 3 Belarusian hyper casual publishers. So it was a huge industry, and a lot of money went through it. So there are more than 20,000 people working in game dev industry in Ukraine. There are more than 80 game dev companies, and 82% of interviewed companies are building mobile games. Also, as you see, a big percentage. Probably because they had more of success stories. Stalker, Cossacks, they really opened the door for them. So study of the past in game dev. So of the most studied game, of course, Stalkers, over 4,000 publications. And it's interesting that Stalker is a bit older than World of Tanks, but World of Tanks is catching up. It's kind of interesting. And probably there are more, because I did not researched I almost did not research Russian publications right now for some reason, because the word Stalker goes there for like a long way, and there's some other things discussed. It's more difficult and a more thorough job to research in the Russian language. So, and it actually represents quite interesting. It's like retro Soviet style. Considered to be reflecting the 90s, the fall of great Soviet Union empire, and the destruction, zombies, and so on. They represent the whole the whole like direction of Ukrainian industry. And those are not all the games I found. There are also Fear the Wolves by Vostok Games in 2019 and some others, but those which got on the slide so far, you can see that a lot of them were all of them are focused on like post-apocalypse in Russia. It also shows by the fact that there are no religions almost, unless something invented right now, a lot of synthetic something, because people, just like after fall of Soviet Union, they lost the moral orientation. They were searching for something, and it gave a lot of it gave a lot of food for a lot of different cults appearing. So this is a whole separate moment. And the most famous stalker, Shadow of Chernobyl, by the way, we're now negotiating the book we wrote about how the first one was created, with the main game designer and the only writer of this game. So hopefully you will find out what it was inspired with in the future. Okay, a research game. Now we'll go real quick. Okay, research game, the same. Basically, a lot of things the same as in Belarus, but Ukraine doesn't have game dev education unless it's private, and they have much more researchers quoting and researching their games, and they are more diverse. It's just fascinating. Game development industry in Ukraine indeed more diverse and rich. A crisis of education is crisis of research. Unfortunately, they also higher education is a really big problematic problematic zone of Ukraine, and they unfortunately famous for having a lot of there are a lot of talented researchers, but unfortunately quality of universities, the system of universities, is not very flexible and very corrupt. This is why talent is not that much promoted. Innovative objects are not giving any attention and not giving a chance. So unfortunately, it doesn't provide any formal research unless it's journalistic. They have some good journalistic research, which we did not focus on in this. Development of historical games in Ukraine. Okay, I'll give you some numbers as well. It's a smaller now, so to fit more on the page, but you actually can see that some historical, one of the first one is Admiral Sea Battles by Meridian 93. That guy is crazy. He actually developed some games with Japanese in 90s. It just, I have no idea who he is, but it was a good discovery to me. Thank you, like a workshop. I actually found some new stuff there. It's actually would be quite interesting. And of course, a lot of Sherlock Holmeses. From what I counted, even though I spoke with with company founders, they told me about 12 Sherlock Holmes games, and I found 3 more, which they didn't tell me about. So they have 15 Sherlock Holmes games. That would be an interesting article. Games and education in Ukraine. Okay, so right now, it's very important because, as we mentioned, it's important for things not to repeat and for the war not to repeat itself. And this and a lot comes for game. First of all, therapeutic moment. Games are made by game developers for therapeutic means, to express themselves, also to support other people emotionally who are supporting Ukraine, and also to keep awareness of the problem, and of course sometimes to tease the other side. So we arranged a lot of events since then. There are Chernobyl. These are all games you can check out. Most of these were developed separately, and a lot of companies, including what Elizabeth Klimovich is not here, but she's from a Logos company who created one of the games, which is now part of their digital, which is inside of the system of Ukrainian digital passport, like profile of government profile, DIA. They actually have a video game there inside of the system. Which Ukrainian Farmy is actually a whole genre of games. They actually about tractors stealing tanks, and they had like 3 more games about that. You can check them out. It's pretty cool. It's a good, very interesting and significant. I'm waiting for a game about Patron, like the most famous dog. Putin's Slayer. Oh, look, Lukashenko's are all cool. This is eBayraktar. It's actually part of Ukrainian national portal. They made it there, and right now they published another one. So it's pretty cool that they've done it, and they've done it on their own accord. Battle for Ukraine actually played it. Sorry. Okay, sorry. And basically, I don't have any more time. So we actually organized events to support information about it, Game Dev Under Bombs. It's an ongoing event. We will add some publications and lectures about it. So, we organized a couple of game jams, which were done for people to express themselves inside of Ukraine and outside of Ukraine. Some pretty cool, amazing games are developed. This is really heritage about Ukrainian traditional holidays. It took the first prize at that game jam. It was awesome. I was co-organizing both of them, and this is Combat Vision. Even one game project which we developed based on Operation Flashpoint. We took UX from there. Actually, we thought to be games, and now it's used in army and even got some recognition. So thank you very much.